Hello and welcome to 21st Century Saints. We just got dropped into that a little bit suddenly, Doug. So welcome to 21st Century Saints. Welcome, Doug Vincent.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to Richard Heath, my other half. We tried this before a week or so back, Doug, didn't we? And the storms raged and disrupted us. So thank you for trying again. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I've already had a little bit of a chat with you, so we're looking forward to this.
No problem.
So I was going to say, Doug, you're one of our biggest supporters. So firstly, a big thank you from 21st Century Saints, because you are one of the
people you're welcome.
Always jumps into our comments and supports us financially and always has lots of interesting things to say and ideas and thoughts and things. So we really, really appreciate it. But we want to find out a little bit about you. So this is my corridor conversation, and I've dragged Richard into the corridor with me as well. So we're both bunking off class.
Okay. Which is unusual. I'm a good attender to classes and lessons.
Yeah. So, Doug, tell the world about Doug Vincent. Tell us how your Mormon story, how you got to be a Mormon.
Oh gosh. Okay, so I have to go back quite a bit, but what happened was my parents were living in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. I was about 6 years old, and we lived in an apartment building, and the neighbors across the street from us were LDS. Well, of course, we didn't know anything about the church, but they secretly, I guess, told the missionaries to come and visit our family. So let me paint you the picture. So if you've ever seen Archie Bunker, that's closer to what my dad was like. You know, he was kind of this gruff, very, he cussed a lot. He drank beer, he smoked, you know, and it was kind of like watching football on Sunday kind of guy. And then my mom was very much like June Cleaver, if you know who June Cleaver is. Yeah. You know, the perfect little housewife, you know, very sweet and always had her stuff together. And so they sent the missionaries over and they knocked on the door, and it just so happened that my dad was the one that answered the door. Well, you would think that my dad would have told him to jump in the lake, but he is the one who actually invited him in. And my mother, my sweet little mom, is the one who wouldn't even come in the room with the missionaries.
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, my dad had kind of become a little bit disenchanted with the Methodist church that we were going to. And he was just kind of looking for something different, something that had a little bit more depth to it, I think. Mm-hmm. And voila, here's the church. So, of course, after we started taking the lessons, the neighbors across the street, they kind of, you know, got involved a little bit more. But I can remember the missionaries coming over and teaching. And of course, I was too young to really know what was going on. You know, we just wanted to wrestle with the missionaries. That's all we wanted.
Yeah,
to do.
sure.
The kids, you know.
So those neighbors must have seen something in your family and thought they'd make good Mormons. They must have.
Evidently, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, the family got baptized. Well, first, I got to tell you about my first experience going to church, because this was before we got baptized. So, we went to this little church. It was not a big chapel, fairly narrow. It was like I guess you'd call it a two-phase building. You know what that is?
No.
Where you just have like the chapel and then a little hallway and then like a primary room.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
So it was fairly small. It wasn't huge. But this did have a basement, which was a little unusual. This church had a basement. But anyway, so we go into the chapel, and up at the front, of course, you got the podium, and then over to the side was the sacrament table. Well, I saw this table, and it was covered with a cloth. And the shape of the cloth kind of looked like a casket, you know. And so it's like, Mom, they've got dead people in here, you know. Of course, later on, they uncovered the sacrament cloth, and it wasn't a dead person. So,
although there
but I
may be
didn't.
dead people there that you just didn't see. We like to think
Maybe
that
I didn't
our
see
loved
them.
ones are
Yeah,
still there
I didn't
with
see
us.
them.
Doug, can I just ask
Yeah.
what kind of year are we talking here?
This would have been in the early 60s.
Okay.
Okay, like 63, something like that.
Okay. And so how was attending church in the early 60s? How did it feel for you generally?
Of course, I loved it as a kid. They had primary going on, and you had lots of kids to play with. And I'd kind of had in the Methodist church, I'd kind of had a more scary experience because I was a little bit younger, and I was not used to being away from my mom, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And they would take you down into this it was a huge church, and they would take you into this area where they had the Sunday school. And just being in a smaller congregation, I think, helped me as a kid feel more comfortable. And of course, we made all kinds of little friends in the church, and so so it was good. I made the transition just great. Of course, later on, I had to get baptized in the basement of that church, and they didn't have hot water.
Oh.
So I kind of regretted in a way.
So Doug,
I
I was born towards the end of the 60s, and so I was growing up end of the 60s and through the 70s, similar kind of age that you would have been at that time. And my memory of the church in this country at that time was very exciting. Now, obviously, I have probably rose-tinted memories of my childhood at that time, but it felt like there was a lot going on in chapels at that time. The chapels were often open. There were often activities. Most weekends, it felt we were doing something. And then there were lots of things such as road shows and conventions and firesides. Is that how it was for you guys in the States? And if so, what were the things that you really enjoyed at that time?
Yeah, so we did all of that. The meeting schedule was really different. So we had 2 meetings on Sunday. You would go to Sunday school in the morning, and then you'd come back in the afternoon for sacrament meeting. And then Relief Society and primary and all of these different activities had their own day.
Oh wow.
So, I remember that.
Yeah. Wow.
Before the consolidated program.
Oh,
I think we've lost Doug.
Let's come back. There we go.
There we are.
Oh. Family there. So did you hear what I said?
No, it just dropped for a second, but you're back again now.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is we had meetings all through the week, and each auxiliary was, there's Nemo. each auxiliary had their own day, so like Relief Society would meet on Tuesdays, youth would meet on Wednesdays, primary had their own day, they'd meet on Thursday. So you were practically going to church every day of the week. And then, of course, like you were saying, activities. We had lots of fundraising kind of things that we had to do. The money situation of the church was different. So every unit of the church, like if you wanted a building, you would have to raise a certain percentage of the money on your own. And so we were there in Oak Ridge for, I think, the first 1.5 to 2 years that I was in the church. And then we moved to Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
In Nashville, we were here for a couple years, and then we moved just north of Nashville. And when we did that, we were in an area that did not have a church building. And so the church actually met in an old house, an old Tudor style house. Would look you look good right in your neck of the woods, Tudor. it was an old Tudor style. It'd probably been built in the 30s or something. And it was later condemned by the health department after our ward moved out of it, but literally, and torn down. But we met in this old house. It was quite a ways from our house too. We had to drive 20 miles, 25 miles each way. So, you know, there was a lot of sacrifice and all that, but we were also focused on getting a building, you know. And I can remember and we were not a ward, we were just a branch, and our branch president would load up a station wagon and head out to Salt Lake City every year or two and go argue with the brethren to get us a building, you know. And eventually we did get one, but we had to, you know, our families had to sacrifice. I can remember my parents we were literally living off, you know, bread and water practically, because they had to pay so much for the building fund. You know, the bishop would call each person in and say, hey, I want you to give X amount of dollars, you know, and you'd argue with him, I guess. But, you know, it was tough. It was a real sacrifice.
It really was. And yet people did it because that was something they believed in and they felt strongly about. And people, same as in the UK, you know, people drive vast different distances to attend or to support or to participate. And I know that your family were involved in building the chapel.
We were. So we were in an area. We were in an area called Banbury. You may have heard of Banbury Cross. There's a famous nursery rhyme about it. We were in Banbury Ward, my branch actually. I think my dad was branch president at the time. We were a family at that point of 5 children. Mum and dad stopped at 9 children, but we were 5 at the time. I was very young. We moved away from there when I was 5, turning 6. So it was in the first 5 years of my life. But we had a similar experience. And it was exciting, actually. Now, obviously, I was too young really to be involved. But I do remember there being a big... we were meeting in a local town hall type place at the time, a community centre. And we had a picture on the wall of a chapel, and it was all divided into bricks. And you could buy a brick for 1p or however much it was and contribute your money like that. And there was also an opportunity to work on the chapels, of course, you know, which, of course, you would never get away with nowadays. And you would get certificates and awards for the number of hours that you participated. I, of course, did none. But I do remember the opening, which was very exciting. We had a hog roast, which I remember. But my brother, Adrian, who was 14 at the time, got an award for clocking the most hours over the whole of the building of the chapel. He was there all the time. Yeah. He probably should have been at school. I don't know. But yeah, it was exciting to feel like you were a part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And I remember the penny drive. Did you have the penny drive in primary?
I'm sure we did. I'm sure we did.
All your little extra pennies and put them in a jar so that they could use it to buy whatever. Yeah. So
I think people's believing members' ability to demonstrate their faith and they were all in, weren't they? They would do it in whatever way, whether that is through service or through the distances they would travel or through actually just putting their hands in their pocket and actually funding things like building chapels. I don't think there's ever been any doubt that believing members go all in on their, with their faith, don't they, to support the church and to make things happen. And like you say, just participating almost every day of the week in something.
Yeah, it is a huge commitment and a huge sacrifice almost all the time.
Yeah, and I know the word pioneer is very special to the Mormons, and the Americans' pioneer experience is very specific and very well recorded, and it's an important part of American history. However, I really felt my parents were pioneers at the time. They really were the ones who took the bull by the horns, and of course those others that were around at the same time that took the bull by the horns and put their money where their mouth was and demonstrated their faith, and they were all in.
Yeah. So who was the prophet at that point in time? The sort of
that was David O. McKay. David O. McKay was the prophet. Yeah. Yep. So I can remember when he passed away that there was a big shock. That they came and announced it in primary, and everybody was crying and everything. So yeah, but he had been a prophet for a long time, so
Well,
a lot of people, that was the only one he'd known.
Is he the prophet that you consider to have been your prophet, Doug? I know very often we grow up and a particular prophet is the one that we feel was the one for our generation. Mine was Spencer W. Kimball. I've just wondered about yourself.
I think Spencer W. Kimball probably would have been the one that I felt, because he's the one that issued my mission call. And,
right.
So my group, my generation was the first one that went out under the every member a missionary challenge, So before then, you may or may not be called on a mission as a young person. And then he turned things around and said, nope, every young man should serve a mission.
Yeah.
Everybody started getting really serious about serving missions. And I think I was like the third or fourth person from my ward that went on a mission underneath that program, so to speak. So that was in 1977 is when I went out.
Where did you go to?
I went to Idaho. Idaho, yeah. Potatoes, yeah. So I had, here's the funny thing. I had wanted to go to England.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Everybody said, where do you want to go? And I wanted to go to England. Okay. But they wound up sending me to Idaho,
Right.
But it was actually a really fantastic mission. I loved my mission. It was great. As opposed to what people might think, when you go to a high LDS area where there's a lot of LDS people, there's actually more activities for missionaries, because all those people just, by the numbers themselves, wind up affecting neighbors and friends. They wind up wanting to hear about the church. People are more familiar with the church because it's so prominent in their area. And so we were constantly busy, which was good. That's what I needed personally.
It's what you need, isn't it? Yeah, as a missionary.
Yeah, I needed it. And I was kind of a little bit of a shy person. And it was that was a mission where you could really, you really learn to work and to lead out and things like that. So I had a great mission. I loved it.
Good.
So,
can I take you back just a little bit to your run up to the mission? Was it something that you really wanted to do? Was it something that you were all in for, or did you take a bit of persuading?
No, I mean, as soon as Spencer Kimball came out and said every member missionary, I told my parents I want to go on a mission. And so I just planned on it from then on.
Good.
That was something I got to do. I saved up my money. Yeah.
So did you go, was it Provo MTC at that point for you? Did everyone go to Provo?
They didn't have the MTC except for foreign students.
Wow.
Foreign missionaries, not foreign students. But so I was it was either the last group or the next to the last group to go through the Salt Lake Mission Home.
Oh, right.
So the old Salt Lake Mission Home is where you would go if you were English speaking, and you would only be there for 3 days. Okay. One day you would go to the temple, because back then there were so few. Okay, this is kind of weird, but back then there were so few temples that a lot of missionaries actually went on their mission without being endowed.
Sure, yeah. I can believe
so they would come to the mission home, and part of that was that they would go. Everybody would go through the temple and do Salt Lake Temple and do an endowment session, and then at the end of that, you would go to the assembly room. Assembly hall, I think they call it, and general authority would come and speak to you and let you ask questions and things like that. So I don't remember who our general authority was, but that was kind of cool to see. So I got to see a lot of the Salt Lake Temple that a lot of people never see.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Just from that one experience.
Live performance at that point, Doug?
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like 90-year-old, kind of different.
I remember hearing about the live performance and thinking it was just like a rumor. It wasn't true, because I couldn't imagine such a thing. I went through the temple just before my mission in London. I went to the Provo MTC, and we got to go to Provo Temple because it's just across the road. And I remember someone mentioning about this live performance in Salt Lake Temple. I thought that can't be right. How does that work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the first, I went to Washington D.C. Temple to get my endowments. That had just been completed a couple years before, a year or two before, and so they had the films, and then I went to Salt Lake and they had the live. So I got to see both. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. I enjoyed going to Provo Temple. I went as often as I could. Obviously, it was all pretty new to me at that point. I'd been through once before going on a mission, so it was nice to go with the other missionaries from your district in the MTC to go to Provo Temple. And I was there for a good month as well, so I got plenty of opportunities to do that.
Right.
So heading off on your mission then, who was at home still at that point? So you got mum, dad. You're the oldest, aren't you, Doug? Am I remembering that right?
I'm the oldest. There's 5 siblings, or 5 of us, 5 kids. So I'm not the oldest. I'm the next to the oldest. I'm the oldest boy. Okay. I have an older sister, and then I have a younger brother and another younger sister, and then another younger brother. So, but there's a huge gap between the last sister and brother. Okay, like 12, 13 years.
Surprise.
Yeah. It's like, hey, mom and dad brought us into the living room and sat us down and said, we have an announcement. And we're like, oh my gosh, what is this? You know, that was the last thing on our mind. So, yeah. So we learned to.
Did you feel like you were setting a good example for your younger siblings? It must have felt like a really important thing to not only be listening to the prophet and following that, but, you know, you were trailblazing for them as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was trailblazing for them for sure. I felt good about it.
Yeah.
That wasn't really my primary reason for going, but you know,
sure.
I didn't feel any like social pressure from my family to go on a mission. It was kind of like, do you want to go on a mission? And I said, yeah. And so my dad was really great. He, I think he realized that a lot of times young people say things and they don't really mean it, or they haven't really thought it through. So he asked me if I want to go on a mission. I said, yeah. And he said, okay, well, you have to earn at least half the money yourself. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that made it real. You know, it's like, okay, well, if you want to do it, you've got to go out and earn the money. So I did.
Yeah.
So I thought that was good.
Yeah.
He didn't pressure any of us to go, you know.
What was the contact like with home at that point? Because obviously nowadays you can email and you can contact your family weekly. When our son went on his mission 10, 11 years ago, it was Mother's Day and Christmas Day. And then you could email and write letters or what have you. But what was the contact like for you from Idaho back to Nashville?
It was twice a year.
Yeah.
Mother's Day and Christmas. And then letters. And we didn't have email. It was all paper.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So you'd have to write out a letter with a pen and stick it in an envelope and mail it. Yeah. And then they would mail you back. Yeah. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that now? Do you think, obviously things have changed a little bit now, reflecting on your experience as a missionary, do you think it was helpful that you had that distance? Was it a hindrance? Did it not make any difference either way?
I actually, for me, I thought it was helpful because I just was absolutely not homesick at all. I wasn't the type of person that was homesick. I was like, cool, I'm on my mission. Let's go. You know, let's do the mission thing. So I didn't want a lot of distractions, to be quite honest. I thought it was just fine. Now, if they had it where you could call home every week, that probably would have seemed okay to me at the time because that would have been normal. But I mean, looking at it from where I came from, that seems like almost excessive to me because I never thought of ever calling home every week. It'd be like, what are you, like some sort of Klingon, you're clinging on your mom's apron strings. What is it? But I realize now that there's such a diversity of people's mental health, mental state, and what helps them or doesn't help them. So I'm glad that they've changed that. I'm glad they've changed that rule. It was very arbitrary and almost seemed kind of cruel. But the part of it that I did think was cruel was like if a parent became deathly ill or passed away, you weren't supposed to go back home. And that I didn't agree with that. That part I didn't agree with.
It's interesting to hear you use that word as well, Doug. I think cruel is a good word to use, because I don't think it's necessary, and the change in rules now is proving that it's not necessary. I didn't struggle too much as a missionary myself. I actually had quite a bit of contact with my family because I'd had to go backwards and forwards throughout the 2 years because of health concerns. So I saw quite a bit of my family anyway. Plus, my family are the type who would say, well, we know it's the rules, but we're going to pop up and see you at Christmas. That's what we do. However, as a parent, I found it incredibly cruel. And of course, we put on a brave face and we had the stiff upper lip and we didn't talk about how difficult it was. But we had our quiet, silent moments of sadness. And sending a child on a mission was a lot harder than being a child going on a mission.
Right. I think that it probably would have, and probably does, the new policy. I think it helps families feel more a part of that experience with the missionary. Yeah. Whereas, in my day, you just, it was like going off to war. You left and, they didn't really know what was going on unless they got a letter from you, So I think it's a much more humane and inclusive way to do it now. I think that missionaries who tend to be homesick, and they've lowered the age. That's a big deal, because an 18-year-old as opposed to a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old going out, there's a maturity change there. So I think that makes a big difference. And I think that making that change where they can call home every week is a really great one. But I think also it just helps the family just feel more inclusive. There's less anxiety, I think, on the part probably of the parents. It's like, how's my kid doing? They know because they're talking to them.
I think it's healthy for sibling relationships as well. We really noticed the impact on our when our oldest son went on his mission on his younger siblings, because they were used to having him there as part of the family dynamic, and then suddenly, it's a stunted relationship, isn't it? So I think it's a really positive change that they allow that contact to be much more free, and that can have a really positive effect on people, because if you're serving as a missionary and you're saying lots of positive things back to your younger siblings, they're more likely to want to go themselves and perhaps stay on track.
And I think it's an important concession from a church whose members will always say that the family is at the heart of our religion. I always remember when people used to say to me, so what's the difference between you and other religions? Well, we are all about the family. And prior to those changes, it didn't feel like it was about family around those times. I don't know about you, Doug. I had companions on my mission who were homesick. And I'm not sure that not having contact with their family helped that situation, because actually all it did was meant that they had to lie. They had to make up a medical condition or whatever that meant they got to go home. To the extent that when I was in Australia at first on my mission, and I had a problem with my kidney was failing and I had to come home, my mission president thought I was just faking it so that I could go home, because there was no other way of achieving that. I think homesickness is probably, if it can be assuaged, is more easily done with the support of parents and family than just cutting off. And I think those people who are homesick and are going to come home, they're going to come home either way, whatever the circumstance. Anyway.
Yeah.
So
you served a mission, you loved it, you felt it helped you develop lots of social skills, and you said you were introverted, which I can't imagine, but you that really helped those skills then presumably to feel like you could lead and speak to public gatherings and things like that. So where did that take place?
Okay, so I came back home. I went out to BYU, and I have to say that at college, I just was not getting along well at college. I wound up dropping out of college. I just didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. It felt like there was a lot of pressure to kind of like, decide what you're going to do. I had no idea what I was going to do. I wound up dropping out, and I went to work for a jewelry and gem company.
Oh, wow.
And I became a gemologist, which not a degree. You could just go through some training, So I worked with that for 8 years. I worked in Provo, still in Provo, but I was out of school and doing the gem thing. But that I kind of came to the realization at some point, because it was a family-owned business, and it kind of came to the realization, eventually there's not really going to be any opportunity for me to go anywhere in this company, because it was a family business, and I just didn't see it going anywhere. So I wound up moving back to Tennessee, and my sister started a landscape company. So I went from doing gemology stuff. I say I went from diamonds to dirt. Okay.
I said last time, I like this joke, so I'm going to say it again. You did treasure, and then you did digging. I'm just saying, you followed Joseph Smith there.
Yep. Me and Joseph we were like this, we understand each other. But yeah, so I did that, and then I tried to go back to school, but I still just wasn't getting anywhere with the school thing. So I wound up, while I was going to school, I had switched over to working at Vanderbilt Hospital, Vanderbilt University, which is it's a well-known place. And an opportunity came up for a management position in the pharmacy over their purchasing. And I applied for that, and I got that. So that was good, because all of a sudden now I had more of a normal job, and I didn't feel as much pressure to really do anything as far as going back to school or whatever. It wasn't critical. Now, while I was in that job, so I worked that job for 8 or 10 years, something like that. And then while I was in that job, I wound up getting involved in computers, because our department, now this is back when PCs were just happening, right? They were all new. Windows had just come out, right? So the department didn't have, they had like a mainframe kind of computer system, but they didn't have, personal computers and things like you would expect now. So I kind of got into that, and I wound up getting involved in the technology side of things. And because of that, and some opportunities opened up for me to go to work for a software company. So my bishop at the time, a good friend of mine, he was a hospital administrator, and they had started using some new software, medical software, and that company was located in Nashville. And he said, we've been using this new software, and this is real. I think this is really going to be, the future. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. He said, well, you're into the computer stuff. He said, you might want to, give this company a look. And so he pulled his phone out, and he called up the vice president. He knew that the vice president of the company. He called him up on the spot. We were eating lunch together. He called him up on the spot and said, hey, I got this guy here, and would you like to talk to him? And so we arranged a meeting, and the guy hired me on the spot. So wow. I went from there from the hospital to this software company. And that's kind of where I've stayed ever since, as far as the job goes.
Those are the kinds of contacts you want, aren't they?
What's that?
Those are the kinds of contacts you want.
They are, and it just happened. It was completely spontaneous. There was no planning. I didn't go to school and become, a computer programmer and then go through all that. It just kind of morphed. I was in the right place. And, when there's a bubble you can ride when an industry is at a certain stage, when it's things are changing and it's early in that change process, you can latch onto it and kind of ride it. Whereas those opportunities go away very quickly. So I think I was, yeah.
They do. You're doing yourself a disservice, Doug, because you've got to be a smart cookie for them to think he's the right guy for this opportunity. I'm sure they.
Or maybe I'm just stubborn.
For anybody.
Maybe I'm just stubborn. Maybe that I'm a hanger-on or clinger,
No,
but
I'm sure they saw your capacity and thought, this is the guy to put in charge here.
And it says a lot about you that you are wanting to take hold of that new technology. When I left school, I went to art school and I got a job as a draftsman. Now, at that time, CAD/CAM was just coming in, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I wanted pens, pencils, rulers, rubbers, and I stuck with that, and I lost my job because other people, younger kids came along who saw the opportunities with the new technology and read the manuals and taught themselves how to do it. And yeah, that was the end of that for me. Can I change the direction a little bit?
Go for it.
Because I know we're going to run out of time before we've covered everything that we want to. So we know a little bit more about you now, Doug. Lots more that we could find out, and I'm sure over the years we'll find out more about you. But I want to take us back to the corridor, our metaphorical corridor that we're in now. You're in a little bit of a different position to us. I know you're still active, although Ruth says you don't attend church. You do online church. We haven't attended church for a couple of years now, so we've not been in a corridor for a little while. However, we've had those conversations in the past. And so I kind of wanted to take us to that metaphorical corridor and to some of the things that we might, if we were in the same corridor together, talk about. Now, to start that conversation, I wanted to know, what are some of the things that you are most pleased with about the church? What are those things that you still, if you could boil it down to its best bits, what are those bits that you most enjoy about being a Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Okay, well, I haven't really dissected that before, but I really do love the community of the church. There's so many people that I love in the church that are just, such great friends, and they're just great people, so I think the church has a lot of really good people in it. I'm sure lots of churches do, but this is the only one I'm familiar with. So the people have a lot of faith. It's a strong faith. It's not kind of wishy-washy faith. Most people have very strong faith. There's good morals. There's good values. I think the youth program has been awesome. Now, I was involved heavily with the youth in the church. I was a scoutmaster. I was a cub master. I was young men's president. I was a bishop's counselor over the young men's, and young women's at times. So I've been involved with the kids, and I really enjoy, work with them. So I think the kids have a great program where there is enough kids to make it work. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to put that little caveat on it because, and Ruth, I think we talked about this last time, but I feel like we live where I am we're in a little bubble. We're in this ideal little bubble. People talk about the way things are out west, where they have really, lots of strong wards and things out there. Well, we have a very strong ward in our area. And we have had, with the exception of just a couple of years where they split our ward and they recombined it, we've had, sort of that critical mass of youth that people really are enjoying the program. The kids are, and they're all friends with each other, and you don't have lots of cliques and things like that. So I'm in kind of this ideal spot where I don't think there are a lot of spots like that, unfortunately, but That's where I am. So, but from what I've seen, it can work really well for the youth, those programs. So I think that's great. I think the missionary program is great for young people. I mean, what an opportunity. That's just something that most kids that age are not going to get, is to go off and serve other people for a couple of years, even though some of it's proselyting. So I think there's tons and tons of really good things.
Can I just ask you a question on missionary? Obviously, the missionary program is one of the things that the church is particularly well known for. In my last years of going to church, missionary work was one of the things that I perhaps had a little bit of a bugbear with. Do you I went on my mission, and I had probably had a very similar experience to yours. It was hard work. We did a lot of tracting. Our success rate of converting was pretty low. I did a lot of social type work with people who weren't particularly interested in the gospel, which was fine by me, but that needed some help, and some people who really needed help. But I kind of felt, as we were coming towards the end of our membership of the church, that perhaps the field wasn't white or ready to harvest anymore, and that perhaps there was a better way of spreading the gospel. I wasn't convinced that sticking to the whole, let's get some 18-year-old, often immature, often unconverted young people themselves to go out there and spread the gospel. I thought there's perhaps a better way. Do you think that is still the best way for the church to do missionary work, or is it worth exploring other options?
I think it's worth exploring other options. And I am not at the same place I was when I went on my mission, or even where I was, 5 or 10 years ago with the church, and the way I feel about things. I think that that the service part of the mission is the most important.
Yeah, really
and
important.
I think that needs to be emphasized more. I think it is in many instances. I think having an option to give kids to do a proselyting or a service mission would be a great deal.
That'd be amazing.
I think that's what they need.
Yeah.
I think they need to get away from just proselyting to allowing people to just go out and serve. And I know a couple that's, they're retired, and they're just going around doing service missionaries. They went to somewhere in the Kiribati, I think, in the Pacific Ocean. It's an island nation, or anyway. But those people, struggle just to have water that they can drink, and some basic infrastructure stuff. And this couple went there, and that's what they did. They helped them out. And I thought, that's awesome. That's what we need to be doing more than pounding the pulpit.
Yeah.
When our eldest was on his mission, he was in Canada at the time of some terrible floods. And we got very excited because we were able to watch him on the news, on the internet. He was being interviewed along with some others. And I think he always said that the thing that he enjoyed the most, other than, of course, meeting new people and new experiences and places, the thing he enjoyed the most was that service element of being able to get out there and feel like you're actually helping people. And I think largely that when we can demonstrate our Christianity in that way, I think people are much more likely to want to hear any message that we might then want to share with them.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
Any other good bits then that you think that Mormonism does that really, really well? So we've got the youth program, we've got missionary opportunities, community, which I agree.
Yeah.
I think they do all of those things really well. Yeah.
And they've got a big purse.
They have now got a very big purse. All of those pennies in your penny drives that you did, they invested wisely.
Started it all. Those pennies.
And you don't have to say if you don't want to. What are the bits that you think, that bit I would happily leave behind, that bit I would happily cut out of Mormonism if we could?
I don't think my brother Julian, who you may or may not have seen on other shows, I don't think he'll mind me saying, at one point he was convinced he was going to be the prophet. He was going to live the gospel to such a way that God would know that he was the one to lead the church. When you are the prophet, Doug, what are those things that you would change?
When you're in charge.
Oh gosh. Well, transparency would be the first thing
Okay.
we would instantly become a transparent organization. I really kind of, most of it revolves around some form of transparency, transparency about our history, transparency about finances, transparency about the things that we may have done wrong in the past, and apologies for those types of things. I think there's a hubris that's kind of taken hold in the church that's very disturbing to me. And it's kind of a doubling down, I think. The current leadership, I think, is, wants to make sure that we maintain what they've been able to maintain in years past, which is not entirely transparent or honest or anything. And I just think that's a big mistake. Yes. So, Ruth, when we had our last talk, I did talk a little bit about, where am I faith-wise and how did all that happen? And I went along in the church quite happily until about 2010, 2012, something like that. And I had, of course, the internet was out and people were starting to chat more with each other. And I had found myself in several instances in online groups where they were criticizing the church or said something negative. And I felt like that. In fact, I think there had been a talk maybe where someone had said that we need to use our voice online. And I had taken that pretty seriously. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to respond to this, So I did, and promptly got my rear end handed back to me on a platter, because, the things that I thought were the answers to some of these questions and the issues being raised were pathetically naive, to really put it mildly. And so that, of course, that kind of starts sobering you a little bit, but it makes you also dig. And so I, for a while, places like Fair Mormon, I was going to the faithful places, and those answers, though, weren't entirely adequate. So at some point in one of those groups, someone had mentioned that there's this great new biography about Joseph Smith that was written by a Harvard or a Yale professor, and he was a state patriarch, and it's supposed to be the most accurate biography of Joseph Smith yet. And I thought, well, I've got to read that, because I was a big Joseph Smith fan. I had read all kinds of, all his diaries, supposedly all his diaries. Not, they were whitewashed. I didn't know that, but I'd read all this stuff that, from church sources that, and I just thought he was awesome. So I got this book called Rough Stone Rolling that they had mentioned. And I read that book, and it was just, it was just a shock, it was a bombshell, because here was a portrayal, supposedly a faithful portrayal of Joseph Smith and what Joseph Smith was like, that was completely different than the Joseph Smith that I thought I knew. And, they have that song where it says, "Millions shall know brother Joseph again." And I had to wonder, well, which Joseph are we going to know, because this was not that Joseph that I had grown up with. So that really kind of made me want to start looking at other sources for information. And so I started leaving behind the rigid, only go to church source type mantra, and started saying, well, let me just try to find, good scholarship and good sources. And that leads you, once you start there, you're going to start finding,
you're off the map,
the real truth. Yeah. The truth about Brigham Young's transfiguration, the truth about the first vision accounts, the truth about the Mountain Meadows massacre, the truth about race and the priesthood, which, was a big deal in my day, because the change happened while I was on my mission. The priesthood ban, or that ban was lifted during my mission. I remember everybody kind of being in shock and going, wait, what does that mean? Does that mean that they can hold the Melchizedek priesthood or the Aaronic priesthood? Or, there's all these questions, and it was kind of a crazy time being on your mission and not feeling like you had the information. What am I supposed to tell people? But yeah, so I just started. That's where I kind of started going down the rabbit hole, I guess. And it was a gradual descent. I didn't plunge into it like some people do. I was still clinging on to all the good experiences I had in the church, and
they still count. They still count.
They still count. I mean,
yeah. And there's all sorts of emotions that you feel on that journey, aren't there? Certainly from my experience of confusion and grief and anger, and then hope, and then you kind of circle through all of these things over and over again as you're kind of experiencing new information and figuring out where you sit with it.
It really is. It really is kind of a horrific experience, and not something that you really want people to go through, because it's not pleasant. It's like losing, your loved one or something. So anyway, I got plugged into some other sources. I guess you'd call them less orthodox sources. Started following them, and somewhere along the way, I happened upon a podcast, and I was kind of late coming to podcasts. It took me a long time to warm up to that idea that I was going to sit there and listen to somebody talk for several hours, But I happened upon a podcast by a lady named Gina Colvin.
Fantastic.
And I was like, oh, wow, she is so articulate and so intelligent. And she was talking about some of these issues in the church, and, maybe ways that we could address them and things like that. I'm thinking, why aren't we addressing these issues in the church? Maybe there is a way to address them. So I was kind of smitten with Gina and started following her. And it just so happened that she had an interview with a very dapper English gentleman named Peter Bleakley. And so, oh my goodness. And so the pair of them together, it was like the dynamic duo, Peter articulate and intelligent Gina. It was just amazing. I'd never heard anything like it. And I thought, this is awesome. So I started trying to follow Peter. I was already following Gina, so I started trying to follow Peter, and wound up following him on Facebook, and wound up talking to him on Facebook and, Messenger. And we wound up getting pretty close pretty quick. So that was kind of my first Brit Venger
you are an honorary Brit Venger, Doug. You are across the Brit Venger space.
but I think Peter and Gina were sort of this revelation that, wait a second, you can stand up for things that you don't think are right, and we should be doing more of that. I had also started listening to Mormon Stories and Bill Reel. Now, this was when Bill Reel was encouraging people to stay in the church. That's what I was trying to do that. I kind of went down that road. It's like, I want to stay in the church. Okay, maybe there's problems. Maybe there's some things that need to be tweaked, and honorary Brit Venger. Thank you. Maybe there's things that we can do to improve from within, and I didn't want to let go of everything, but so I started listening to a couple of those podcasts when they were a little more faithful oriented, but of course that changed over time, and which I understand completely why, because I'm kind of changed the same way. I've become much less optimistic about the church's narrative, but that kind of started me down that road, and I got plugged into the Brit Vengers. So.
And I know you participate a lot. Sorry, darling. I know you participate a lot on in the comments anyway, because I see you. Backyard Professor and Mormonism Live, you know, and you always have really interesting and really pertinent things to say. So I always love it when you pop it in there. And that's why Richard really wanted to jump in on this conversation, because
Richard,
you guys are kind of comment buddies, aren't you? Where
my live chat compadre.
Absolutely.
That's right.
And I think that's actually really Mormon of us, isn't it? That even in the space, whether we are still in, nuanced or out, but sitting in that Mormon conversation space, is that we still have that community about us, and we actually extend the friendship and the companionship, you know, regardless of who or where people are sitting as far as their own faith is concerned. You know, it's sort of pull up a chair, have a chat. We can find common ground on this, and I think that's actually quite beautiful. That actually does come out of, I think, that shared Mormon experience.
I think you're right with that, and I think that some of our chats are, you know, it borders on a wart. You know, we have the same people showing up in a lot of the different podcasts, chatting, and we're always, you know, super happy to see, hey, everybody, you know, everybody. It's just like you walked into the chapel and you're greeting your friends, right? So,
it's lovely. And there are lots of people that we recognize in those chats. I haven't got a clue who they are, but I really enjoy being there with them. Something I wanted to just touch on, an interesting thing that you said that I thought actually touched a little bit of a raw nerve. You mentioned two podcasters in particular. You mentioned Peter, and you mentioned Bill, and you talked about how you enjoyed that these were two intelligent members of the church who were advocating for membership of the church, but able to speak their truth as they saw it. But I think that for me, as you said that, the thing that I felt quite ironic was that, unfortunately, being in that space has taken them to a place where the church doesn't want them anymore. They've been excommunicated.
Right.
And I question really whether you can hold that space. And I know from conversations, I don't do this kind of thing very often anyway, so I know I'm safe. But I know there are lots of people that do podcasting now and are vocal. And I know that they converse with each other quite regularly about how long before. I know Nemo has said that. Jane says the same. Ruth says the same. And others, you know, we don't know how long we're going to get away with this before the church boots us out, which would be a shame. And it kind of takes me back to some of the things that you were saying about the transparency and the honesty. You know what? If the church could embrace some of their brothers and sisters, such as your Peters and your Bills, they might have made friends out of them rather than the enemies that they've almost become. I'm not enemies, but I'm not speaking on behalf of those two, but you know, they probably Bill especially because of where he's found himself has probably been quite influential in a lot of people perhaps distancing themselves from the church, whereas they could have used his intelligence and what have you for good to bolster people who are feeling similar and to staying in the church and making that change. You know, we hear a lot about I'm staying in because I'm going to try and make change from the inside. I've always felt very cynical about that, and from the way the church is at the moment, I can't see that ever happening. However, it would be nice if that could be a position that people could hold.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that's all very valid. I think, you know, what I'm seeing over time is that pretty much the criticism of the brethren is the bright line in the sand. And Bill Reel kind of talked about this in his latest Mormonism, Mormon Stories interview. But yeah, there's this bright line, which is you criticize the brethren, you're out, you know. I know Peter did that, and I know other people have done that, like Nemo, but Nemo's not out yet. And so, you know, what's the difference between Peter and Nemo? Well, is it because Nemo was able to go head to head with one of the top legal minds, you know, in the church, Dallin H. Oaks, and maybe he was winning that argument? And even though Dallin H. Oaks didn't back down, maybe internally he was just like, okay, we'll give that kid a pass. You know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to know, but a lot of, you know, the whole progressive Mormon trail is littered with the bodies of the people who either criticize the church or the brethren.
Yeah.
And there's a bright line there, which I think is kind of ridiculous, that an organization can allow for any kind of criticism or dissent, that you have to bow the knee basically to these people. I don't think that's Christ-like at all.
No, and I think it demonstrates a certain degree of fragility as well. When something is that brittle that it can't bend at all, that it can't grow or expand, it seems very fragile. And I'm sure that the church, the organisation won't break as such, but it just doesn't seem like a healthy place for growth and
discussion.
Yeah, for discussion.
When you were talking earlier about having those, going in as an apologetic and thinking I've got the answers, I'll come forward and I was thinking about when you're in primary and you're told to put on the whole armour of God, and I was thinking it is a little bit like thinking you've got this, you're ready for battle, but actually realising you've got a plastic sword and a cardboard helmet and
that is a great analogy, actually. That's a great analogy.
Yeah, suddenly you realise I am not equipped for this at all, but I was handed this armour and these weapons, and it's not fit for purpose. And there's a humility learnt on the battlefield almost, isn't there, when you suddenly realise that all those things that I faithfully learnt and studied don't equip me for the actual information that's now publicly available, and the church itself is making available to us, and that's a whole new area of study, and I think give it 20 years, 30 years, we will look at Mormonism in an entirely different light because of all the actual historical evidence that is coming forward. So last time we spoke, I was waxing lyrical about this podcast about the canal and and you went, yeah, Ruth, that was the podcast that I did with Backyard Professor. So you yourself have done an awful lot of study of Mormon history now, and are working on lots of interesting bits and pieces that are coming out. So that I found absolutely fascinating, about how information moved through that area of America, probably most likely because of that canal system that was there. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, because that was fascinating?
Oh yeah. So yeah, and I I've met enough people now in the if you want to call it the ex-Mo or the post-Mo or the progressive Mo sphere, whatever. We don't have a good name for it, do we? I don't know. We need some sort of a name,
Yeah.
But I've been on.
I think it's apostate, isn't it?
I think we have black and white Mormons, and now we're technical Mormons. So
I like that. We're technical Mormons.
We're the technical ones.
Yeah. So I've met enough people now on these podcasts and gotten to where I can talk to them on the phone and stuff like that. And BYP is Backyard Professor is one of them. And I just happened to be listening to one of his podcasts, and I think it was with Colby Reddish, maybe, but they were talking about the Lost Book of Enoch. That was the subject.
Yes.
And there was sort of this controversy about, well, Joseph Smith talks about the Book of Enoch and some of the stuff he mentions. How could that be in the book of in the Pearl Great Price when they, or maybe it was the JST. I can't remember where that shows up, but I guess it's maybe the JST. But anyway, how could Joseph know this? Basically, how could he know this?
And therefore, it must be inspired, because he couldn't possibly.
Therefore, it's a miracle, and a lot of those miraculous things, like the transfiguration of Brigham Young, have fallen by the wayside as I've studied more. Once you get into it, you learn the truth of it, and it's like, oh, that wasn't really a miracle. That was a lie that somebody told in general conference. But anyway, as they're having this podcast, and they mentioned that, just somewhere in the back of my mind, I remember reading that the Erie Canal. And I knew that the Erie Canal went through Palmyra. Okay. I already knew that part. but I didn't know anything about the Erie Canal other than it's just a, canal, right? But I remember hearing somewhere that there was a library barge that had gone, that would go up and down the canal. And I thought, well, if they had a library in going in Palmyra, then that could potentially be a way that Joseph Smith could have learned some of these things. So I decided to look into it and was just gobsmacked by what I found. And it's like, okay, first of all, the history is fascinating because it was the largest canal in the world. It was designed and built by 2 lawyers and a math teacher. I mean, it's just insane stuff like that. They used locks designed by Michelangelo on the canal. There's all this crazy stuff. But what I found out, what I uncovered, and I got BYP really excited about this, was just that the Erie Canal was like this pivotal development in U.S. history, and not only for commerce but for information. It allowed the rapid transportation of goods and services and information from the West Coast. The East Coast of the United States into the interior of the United States. Yeah, and that it just it made New York City like a super city. It allowed for the rapid expansion and eventually complete, unfortunately, colonialization of the rest of the United States, pushing out all the natives. But it was key. It was key. And so I started digging into this and finding fact after fact and interesting tidbit after interesting tidbit. I got BYP really excited. He said, "You have to come on my podcast." And I'm like, well, okay. So I made a few slides up and I went on his podcast and we did a podcast about it.
And I loved it. And I watched the whole thing and then I was waxing lyrical to you about it. And you're going, yeah, Ruth, that's the one I did. And so, yeah, I absolutely loved it. And that's the sort of Mormon history tour that I could get behind. I think we should go on a canal trip down the Erie Canal and actually experience that.
Yeah.
I just need to ask. So in your research, did you get a hold of Joseph Smith's library ticket with a list of the books that he'd taken out? Did you find that?
Nothing as definitive as that, Richard. I'm sorry.
Keep looking, Doug. Keep looking.
I'm sure it exists somewhere.
I just hope the barge was called Alexandria or something like that. So that library barge was like the Library of Alexandria going up and down the Erie Canal.
Well, the other interesting tidbit is that they had a museum barge that carried antiquities up and down, and they would show it.
I wonder where he got the ideas from.
God.
Yeah. Where did the Egyptian mummy stuff, where did that idea come from? I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's all possible. So so that's where how I've kind of gotten plugged into the podcast. Although the first one was Nemo's, because I was just sitting there commenting one day on Nemo's podcast, and he said, "Doug's coming so much, we need to just bring him on." And Nemo said, "I'm going to send him a link." And I think it was him and Peter, and so I just got on.
And you've done one of his halftime shows.
What's that?
You've done one of his conference halftime shows, haven't you?
Yeah. So Nemo, after that, he said, "Would you help me do a conference halftime?" And I said, "Sure." So I'm sure the SCMC has a file on me now.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, we've done one of those, and that is a hard thing to do, isn't it? Because you've literally got 30 minutes, an hour tops between the session ending and then going live with Nemo, and hats off to him that he does that session after session after session. We were kind of just scribbling around notes like mad that we could sort of things that we
did draw a short straw. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning that we were on.
Yeah. I mean, I've enjoyed those, and it does make you have to pay a real close attention to the talks, and they take notes and what have you. So more hats off to him. I don't know how he can do that, but I guess that's the difference between being old like me and being young like him.
Yeah, definitely. So what's next for you, Doug? Obviously, you're still participating in church. What do you see happening next? What's your thoughts?
I don't know exactly. There's certain things that I'm really excluded myself from on purpose. I do not pay tithing. Will not pay tithing because of the SEC type stuff, the end time peak and all that. That's just completely antithetical to Christianity, as far as I'm concerned. To hoard a Midas trove of gold like that. Which of course means that you can't hold certain callings. And so currently I just make the church program. That's my job in the church. I have been asked to take other callings and I've turned them down. I don't really want to be involved like I was, even though I love the people.
Yeah.
I just don't love a lot of what the church is doing, the institutional church.
Yeah.
I don't want to be seen as too supportive of that. And I don't want to be seen as completely negative about that either, but I'm not going to go out on splits with the missionaries. I'm not going to do that and be in a position where I've got to bear my testimony or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's just, there's certain things that I'm not going to do. So where does that put you? I don't know.
It's hard, isn't it? And so you're just saying yes.
I have members of the family that are still very active that I would never, ever want to hurt or, somehow disrupt their faith. If they came to me, it would be different, but I don't want to be the instigator of that. I don't want to say, I found out all these negative things. I want you to look at them. I really don't want to do that. I think that's unfair to people to have their faith ambushed like that. If they are truly questioning or looking for information, or if they ask me something very direct, then I will be direct about it. And I have been. I have had a couple of things asked about, and I said, no, the global flood did not happen. And here's why, things like that. But I am not going to push my, what I've been through onto somebody else, because it's a super painful thing. It's very painful. And I just don't feel like that's my responsibility to do that.
Ruth and I have had similar discussions. We would love people to ask us more about why we stopped going to church and what have you, but we had kind of decided that that's not a conversation we want to have with people anyway. If the things that ultimately made us decide we didn't think the church was true and we didn't really want to be associated with it anymore is out there, and anyone can find it if they want to. And I don't want to be, as you said, the person that perhaps damages something that's really important to somebody else. And especially when we know actually how painful that then can be. That once you find some things out, you can't unfind them out, and that may possibly change your testimony, your relationship with the church. And we don't really want to be the people that do that. But having said that, I feel in some respects as evangelical about what I now think I know as I was when I thought I knew the church was true. And in the same way as back then I thought I had a message of happiness to share, I feel I've got a message of happiness to share now. And it's a really difficult one to find a happy medium between those two positions.
It is. And I think when Ruth and I first talked, I kind of described the gospel and the church as like this beautiful little box, and inside this box, you've got all the answers to life's hard questions and what happens after death and where did we come from? All those questions, everything's answered. It's all in this encapsulated little beautiful box. And when you open that box and step out of it and realize, oh, wait, there's this whole other bigger box that's actually got a whole lot more in it and a whole lot of other beautiful things too. But when you turn back around and look at that little box, there's no way you can get back in it. You can't get back in.
No.
You're done. You're done. So to do that to somebody that's not prepared or willing or wanting to do that, I just, I don't want a CES letter anybody, just drop that old bomb on them and blow their minds. No, I just don't want to do that. And I know people who are just super happy in the church. Yeah. They are super happy. They have beautiful lives. They have beautiful families. They're super happy individuals, and they love going to church and doing whatever they do in the church. And I'm not going to step in there and be the spoiler. I just don't. It's too stressful. Oh my gosh. I mean, because if I made somebody else go through that, I would kind of start reliving some of the stuff that I went through as well. And it's very painful. So that's kind of where I am. I am very transparent online, though. I made a conscious decision that I would use my real name, that I would not pull any punches there, so, and there's a guy in the ward, I have to tell you, I can't remember if I told you this or not, Ruth, but there's a guy in my ward who called me up one day and said, I would like to come talk to you. And I said, okay. So he came over and he said that he had seen me on Nemo's podcast. And I was like, uh-oh, but evidently he's having, issues as well. He's not as far along as I am, I don't think. But he mentioned that there were other people in the ward who had seen me online as well. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not hiding it, but I'm also not advertising it.
But what you've made yourself there, Doug, is a safe person for people to talk to if they need to. And it's a brave place to put yourself, to kind of say, people might be judging me, might be talking about me behind my back. I've got broad enough shoulders to take that. But ultimately, those one or two people that need to quietly say to me, please, can I offload on you? Because I know that where you're at with things and I'm feeling similarly, but I'm not ready to talk openly about that yet. That is so crucial for some people, to have that person that they can talk to. And I think what's interesting about the space when you're stepping away from Mormonism, even if you're still part of it, is that you do need that community, and it might be a transitory need of that community, and then you might, disappear off and never look backwards. But I think most people need a space where they can talk and openly with people and have that shared experience. So they've got the lingo, they've got the shorthand, they understand. If I say to somebody at work, oh, when my son was on his mission, they haven't got a clue what that means, or I've had to do a huge amount of explaining first before they understand what that actually meant for me as a mum. Whereas for somebody else in the space that we're at, you would get it, other people would get it, and they would also understand maybe some of the pros and cons of that whole dynamic and the whole situation. So I think what you've done is really, really brave, and I think there are probably more people that appreciate you being in that space. I know we certainly do, but even on your local ward level, than are ever going, Doug Vincent, what's he think, going on Meva or whatever, because lots of people have questions, don't they?
I think in that respect, you're a good example to us, Doug.
Yeah.
We've all got stuff to learn still, and I think even before, lots of us know you through being on the live chat, and we know your name, and we're pleased to see you. And I don't think anyone would be surprised to hear you talking now, to learn what a kind of generous man you are, because that comes through in your comments. But equally, I think that's a good example to the rest of us, that actually we don't always have to be full of vitriol and anger all the time, and that we can be moderate, supportive, kind in our approach to wherever it is that we are at on that particular journey. It's nice to think that you are a friendly face beside the box, within the box, and that you can see both sides of that.
Definitely.
Well, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for your biscuit recipe as well, which I haven't yet tried. And at the moment, we don't have a kitchen that we could do any cooking in. We've got 2 settees in it, but I'm looking forward to it.
I'm going to say I was peripheral to this conversation, And it's probably a good thing, because I can sometimes get a little bit, I don't know. I'm not a nationalist, but I can come down very hard on people that are not British sometimes and say, well, we've got it right and you've got it wrong. I'm going to be honest, Doug, I was not in agreement with what you were saying about what a biscuit is, but that's fine. I am familiar with what an American biscuit is, and I have had American biscuit, and it is very, very lovely. And it's actually what I would have called more like a dumpling. Now, not a suet dumpling, Ruth, but you know, the kind of almost not quite pastry, but a dumpling that you would have with gravy and stuff. What I had in America as a biscuit and gravy was almost like what we would have called a dumpling or cobbler.
Oh, okay.
That's what I would have called it.
I'm going to try Doug's.
It's certainly not a rich tea, is it?
No, a custard cream. I'm going to try Doug's recipe.
Good.
And that is whatever that is now biscuit.
I like eating whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you can call it whatever you want.
Delicious is what we call it.
But over here, it's called a biscuit for whatever reason. The name was changed over here. But yeah, I love them, and they're good with savory or sweet.
The funny thing is, Doug, actually, I'm always, or I've for a long time, I've been insufferably cocky about lots of things. I'm learning to be a lot more humble, actually, in old age. But that element of me that's kind of thought, oh, you Americans, you've changed. From what I've discovered, actually, what you guys have is probably closer to original English, and probably our use of the word biscuit has been diluted and changed. You guys have probably got the original version of biscuit that came across with the Mayflower. And so I'm going to try not to be as cocky about those things anymore.
Oh, if post-Mormonism teaches us anything, it's we probably don't know what we're talking about.
We probably don't.
Well, we've had 1 hour 20, so I think we're going to get kicked out of this corridor. We're going to have to let you go and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.
And your
Alrighty.
poor kitten is probably waiting to be fed again, because she definitely needs some attention.
Yeah, she probably, if I know anything about her, she's curled up right outside my office door, waiting for me to give her a little hug.
Yeah. So we'll need to let you go.
Can I just say, I can see Ruth wrapping this up, but I just wanted to say, Doug, it is genuinely a pleasure to be able to speak with you and to put a face to a name, and also to have what I presumed, what I thought you would be, confirmed, that you are this genuine, gentlemanly, pleasant man. And it's always lovely to see you in whatever podcast I'm watching, to see that you're in the live chat, because I do feel like I've got someone. I don't know if we think very similarly about things, but it feels like we do, and it's nice to have that kind of support. And so it's, I look forward to seeing you from now on, and also hopefully to see your face more on these kinds of things, and to hear your words of wisdom as well.
And
I really appreciate that.
And if we can ever entice you to come and visit us in the UK, you know that you would be treated like Brit Venture royalty. We would take you around wherever you wanted to go and visit.
I know you would, and I have that on my bucket list. That's on my bucket list.
Okay, fantastic.
I'll be there one day.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Doug. We've really, really appreciated it, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.
I've enjoyed it.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Keep doing what you're doing. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.